All right, just want to point out that Ronna Graff's testimony was very brief, and she was a former assistant to President Trump, and she was a prosecution witness because they're laying out their case. So we have more coming in on all of that. We do expect that the trial will get back underway any second here. So we'll keep a close eye on that as voters in some new polling say that the former president's legal troubles are, quote, the most convincing reason to consider voting against him. That's from NBC poll. It's followed by the former president taking credit for the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade and possibly pardoning people convicted of storming the Capitol on January 6th. Those are the top three most convincing reasons to vote against the president, according to people's answers in the NBC poll. Swing it over to President Biden. What are their big concerns about him? Age, physical, mental fitness, 23%, illegal immigration, 17%, and 40-year high inflation at 16% on that side. So look at the numbers who say none of these issues is the most convincing reason to vote for somebody else. Former President Trump tops Biden by 12 points. Most convincing reason to not to vote against him. Okay. So with that, we bring in our panel. Karl Rove, former White House Deputy Chief of Staff and for President George W. Bush and co-founder of American Crossroads. Former House Oversight Committee Chairman Jason Chaffetz, both are Fox News contributors. Mark Penn is a former Clinton advisor and pollster, now chairman and CEO of Stagwell and chairman of the Harris Poll. Great to have all of you with us. So, given that backdrop of some of those new polls about why people would and wouldn't vote for either of these candidates, I think everybody wants to see a debate. Let's re-roll the Howard Stern exchange with President Biden, because this is big news. Listen.
I don't know if you're going to debate your opponent.
I am somewhere. I don't know when. I'm happy to debate him.
So to which Trump responded on Truth Social, in fact, let's do the debate at the courthouse tonight on national television. I'll wait around. Mark, your reaction to this, do you think that was planned? Do you think that President Biden was ready to announce to the world in that interview that he wants to debate, or do you think that was off the cuff?
I think that was probably off the cuff, but it was not an unexpected question. And whether or not you're going to debate or not, you just say you're going to debate. So I wouldn't take that at full face value, because if your staff doesn't want you to debate, then they have trouble with all the various terms and whatnot. I think it was the only answer he could give. I think it was a much better answer than I'm not going to debate him, because overwhelmingly, I think debates are important, and the American people demands them of candidates that they're going to vote to be president of the United States.
Yeah. And there goes the former president, Donald Trump, back into the courtroom as we keep close tabs on all of that. Karl Rove, how important is a debate? The American people have lived through both of these men being president, so they have a lot of background. But how important is it for them to debate?
Well, I think they're generally pretty important, but I think they're going to be, this will be the most important presidential debate if it happens since at least the 1980 presidential debate. You may remember back then there was only one between incumbent Jimmy Carter and his challenger Ronald Reagan. A lot of undecideds in late October when the one debate took place. And out of that debate, Ronald Reagan said the right things that convinced the voters who are up for grabs to move decisively into his camp. And I suspect that this debate, if it happens, or these debates, the first one is supposed to be under the debate commission, is supposed to be here in Texas. It's Texas State University. If these debates occur, more people are going to be watching them, and I suspect they will have a dispositive impact on the outcome of the election.
Jason, your reaction to that, and President Biden wasn't sure. He said, I am somewhere. I don't know. Karl just laid out where the first one's supposed to be. What's your reaction?
I don't know that he checked in with the puppeteers that help control this. I think they're going to be shocked by it. I would be shocked if Joe Biden actually debated. I don't think anybody on his team can afford to allow him to answer spontaneous questions and joust with probably one of the better debaters in Donald Trump. I mean, Joe Biden wouldn't even go on the most watched program, the Super Bowl, and answer those softball questions. He's got to have people surrounding him just to walk to to Marine One. The idea that he's actually going to debate, I don't believe he'll actually ever show up for that. And the American people and the American process will be worse for it.
Well, the New York Times is having a very vociferous debate with the Biden White House right now, Mark. The New York Times spokesperson yesterday said, for anyone who understands the role of a free press and democracy, it should be troubling that President Biden so actively and effectively avoided questions from independent journalists during his term. I mean, do you think it happens? I mean, you hear both of your colleagues here on the panel saying if. I mean, what are the ways that they could get out of this that wouldn't hurt the current president in terms of voters?
Well, let me just say that New York Times statement really surprised me. I've never seen the New York Times do something like that. I think from the Biden camp, where it said effectively avoided the questions, they probably said, check, that's what we were planning on doing. I think they successfully have kept their candidate cocooned. I think that has been their strategy. Look, people who want to debate are people who are behind. If Biden is behind coming out of these conventions, you will see debates. If he's ahead coming out of the conventions, shockingly, you won't see debates.
Yeah, I mean, I remember being in Nashville for that debate, and President Biden did well than the candidate. And at the end of the night, I think the overall feeling was that he had outperformed the current president at that point. So, I mean, it's not like he hasn't done this before. But Mark, quick thought on that. Why do you think the New York Times came after the president that way?
I think they've really welled up in frustration. I've been waiting for the press to reject the strategy of being ducked. And I thought they never would. That's why I think this came from management, not the journalists themselves, saying that it's time that Joe Biden sat down with us and did in-depth interviews about what he is going to offer the American public the second term. And so I think it came from management, and I think that they were frustrated, and I was shocked by it. But I think it's a good thing. Look, everybody's got to get out there and debate and answer questions. That's the key element of campaigns.
Does it indicate, Karl, anything more than that to you? Is there still sort of some desire out there for some last-minute convention change switcheroo for the Democrats?
Well, I'm not certain there is in the leadership of the New York Times, but among the American people there certainly is. But I'm with Mark on this. It really was an extraordinary step, and I think it was came from the management, and I suspect it is widely shared outside of the New York Times by other major outlets like the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post and ABC, NBC, CBS, because he wants softball interviews, and he doesn't want to sit down and with tough journalists asking tough questions. Maybe it's because he's uncomfortable with that. Maybe it's because he's busy, but it probably is because his staff understands he's not going to fare too well in those kind of venues.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see what kind of markers they lay down for what they would accept in a debate, what kind of format, are they standing or sitting, who's going to be the moderators. We all want to know where that's going. Thank you all so much, Mark and Karl and Jason. Great to see you on a Friday. Thanks, gentlemen.
Click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You won't get it anywhere else.